Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. I recently went to the community post online and asked you viewers if you minded that we stay on the subject of the Queen Mother from the book by the same name. And I'm glad the majority of you said yes, stay with the Queen Mother. I realize that we're going to widen our circle on the royal family once the Queen Mother gets into the royal family, which will be in this episode, starts out. And it's only going to be more to find out from her point of view, which will be very interesting. When we last left Lady Elizabeth and Prince Albert, they were in the middle of a wonderful event, their wedding, and it was a happy day for all involved, and both families were ecstatic, as well as the bride and groom. So let's see what happens next to Duchess Elizabeth. The first day of her married life, the Duchess woke up at 11 and had breakfast in bed and looked at all the papers. She was tired out with all that happened the day before, and she didn't get up until lunchtime. And when she did, she put on an old blue tweed suit. In the afternoon, the Duke and the Duchess sat together in the sun and walked around the garden. Then they sat down and wrote to their parents and friends. The Duchess wrote her mother that the 3 months before the wedding was exhausting. She said she was miserable leaving her and Mike and David and Father. She said to her mother, "I love you more than anybody in the world, Mother, and you do know it, don't you? Bertie adores you, and he is being marvelous to me, and so thoughtful. He's really a darling, and I hope you all like him." And Lady Strathmore answered back right away. She thanked Elizabeth for the darling letter. "I just love it, and shall always keep it." And she wrote Elizabeth, "I won't say what it means to me to give up you to Bertie, but I think you know that you are by far the most precious of all my children, and always will be. I do love Bertie, and I think very highly of his character, but above everything, I love his really worshipping you. And I go on telling myself that when I get low about you. However, I do wish he was not a royal, but his own dear plain self." And in parentheses, she said, "I don't mean plain in looks." And then she ended by saying that she liked the Prince of Wales immensely, but he's not a patch on Bertie. The Duke wrote to the darling Lady Strathmore, thanking her and Lord Strathmore for letting him marry Elizabeth. "You know how I love her and will always take care of her, and I do hope you will not look upon me as a thief in having taken her from you. I know only too well that Elizabeth is to you and to me everything." Lady Strathmore replied reassuringly that she felt very much at peace about him and darling Elizabeth, who I know is very happy with you. And then letters were also sent to King George V and Queen Mary. The Duke told the King what happiness it brought him to be allowed to marry Elizabeth, and thanked him for all his kindness since their engagement. He hoped that his parents had been happy with the wedding arrangements. It made him anxious, and he wanted the King and Queen to be pleased most of all. He said to them, "I'm afraid you must both have been very tired after it all." The Duke wrote his mother, "I do hope you will not miss me very much, though I believe you will, as I have stayed with you so much longer, really, than the brothers. I'm very, very happy now with my little darling, so perhaps our parting yesterday was made easier for me, but I still did feel a pang at leaving my home." Queen Mary wrote back to the prince saying she and his father would indeed miss him, as you have always been such a good son, and we always turn to you in difficulties, knowing how reliable you always are. Their sadness was softened by the knowledge that Elizabeth would make him such a perfect little wife, and they were already devoted to her. The king wrote to Bertie congratulating him on having a charming and delightful wife as Elizabeth. "I'm sure you will both be very happy together. I miss you very much and regret your having left us, but now you will have your own home, which I hope will be as happy as the one you left." The king also revealed in his letter about David as a personality, and that was the brother of Prince Albert. He wrote, "You have always been so sensible," talking about Bertie, "and easy to work with, and you've always been ready to listen to any advice and to agree with my opinions about people and things, that I always feel like we go on very well together, very different to dear David." The king thought that Elizabeth would be a splendid partner in his work and share with Albert in helping him do all he had to do. Much later, King George VI's biographer, John Wheeler Bennet, said, "No prophecy could have been more completely fulfilled, no expression of confidence more entirely justified. The Duchess was not only to be the partner of his happiness, but his inspiration of encouragement in the face of adversity, his enduring source of strength in joy and sadness. Well, that during the honeymoon time, they were comfortable at Mrs. Greville's house. They walked around the golf course, the Duke with a club, and then they went to church in the rain on Sunday, and they listened to gramophone records, and they talked very hard. They allowed one photographer to come and take pictures of them so other photographers wouldn't come. Then they went to London, and the Duchess was having words with her brothers Mike and David and her mother. After lunch, she and the Duke went to the palace, where she argued in vain with Commodore Grigg. It wasn't known exactly what the disagreement was, but she was becoming impatient with her husband's principal aide. May the 7th, they motored to London and had lunch at the Strathmores, and that evening she had a cocktail with her brother Mike. Then they drove to Euston to take the 11 o'clock sleeper to Scotland. The Duchess's troop of Girl Guides, as well as the Boy Scouts and the local school children, were among those who had come to welcome them. Elizabeth said it was very nice of them. Her parents had prepared a suite of rooms in the oldest part of the castle for them, and they used them from that time on. Elizabeth said it was delicious to be back at Glamis, but the weather was dreadful. Icy, cold, and hail, sleet and snow, showers. They still went out for walks and shot rabbits and visited friends in the neighborhood, or read, relaxed, and wrote many letters. In the middle of the next week, Elizabeth had troublesome cough. Thursday, May 17th, they drove to Cortachy Castle to lunch with the Arley family, and that evening, after playing bezique before dinner, they took to the sleeper back to London. The Duchess was touched by the crowd who gathered at the station to cheer them off. Elizabeth's cough was worse, and they went to Bruton Street for breakfast, and the doctor came and gave her a cough mixture. In the evening, they spent the weekend resting at Frogmore. Tuesday, the Prince of Wales came to dine with them and suggested they go dancing at the Embassy Club. They dashed up to London in his car and joined Paul's party there. And Elizabeth wrote, "Danced hard till 2:30. David sent us back in his car. Very tired and enjoyed it awfully. Coughed a good deal." Friday, May 25th, she was told she had whooping cough. She said it was most annoying, but glad to know what it is. The Duke told his mother that they couldn't go to her birthday party the next day. He wrote his mother, "You can imagine how very disappointed we both are about it, as it is so unromantic to catch whooping cough on your honeymoon." And during this time, Queen Mary was busy with the refurbishment of White Lodge. She was acting on good motives. Her own first home and marriage had been furnished in advance on the orders of her future husband. He thought he was doing a kindness for her. So Queen Mary wanted to ensure that her old home retained its character, but it also be elegant. And it probably wouldn't be easy for the Duchess to feel at home in a house so dominated by her mother-in-law's taste. The couple finally moved in on June the 6th, and they worked together to get their possessions, old and new, fitted in with the furniture that Queen Mary had chosen. So I still don't get when Queen Mary wanted to decorate when she got mad when her new husband had done it without asking her opinion. The Duchess recorded in her diary there was a 2-hour visit of inspection by her mother-in-law a month later. We all went over the house till 5:15. Elizabeth confided to her mother that her bedroom was hideous. She asked her mother if she could have 2 other pictures from Glamis, one of them a Madonna, to hang on the walls. It was a small rebellion. White Lodge was turning out to be not ideal for the young couple. The house was big and expensive to run, and it became a weekend attraction to thousands of people. They wanted to see a glimpse of the Duchess and her husband. They didn't have much privacy at home, and the distance of things was also difficult. It would be 3 years before they could find a suitable home in London, and the Duchess had to make the best of it. The good thing, though, about White Lodge was that the Duke and Duchess had independence and freedom. They were able to entertain family and friends informally, to play tennis and go out riding, and the Duchess hadn't ridden for years. They also drove to London frequently to dine and dance with friends. The Duchess Elizabeth found out that being in the royal family was restrictive. She couldn't go shopping alone, she couldn't travel on trains alone, and she couldn't even get on a bus. She was no longer able to see her friends as spontaneously as she loved to do, and when she did meet them at court or at a function, there was a certain distance imposed by the formality required by the royal family. Later, the Duchess was able to appoint her friends to her entourage, but her first lady-in-waiting was a stranger. She was a generation older and probably chosen by Queen Mary, thinking that lady-in-waiting had the experience to be helpful. She was Lady Catherine Mead. The Duchess gave her a lukewarm description in her diary, saying that she was quite nice. She never became close to the Duchess, and resigned in 1926. The Duchess felt isolated and restrictive, something she hadn't experienced before. Her own family life had been relaxed. The King's life, as the Duke of Windsor later wrote, was a masterpiece of art of being well-ordered, elegant living. The King and the male members of the household wore frock coats every day. Ladies of the household dressed in formal clothes and wore, or at least carried, gloves at all times. In the evening, the dinners were luxurious and formal. The King wore a white tie and tails, and the Queen wore full evening dress with tiara, even when they were dining alone. At Windsor, the men wore the Windsor coat, a dark blue evening dress coat with scarlet collar and cuffs, gilt buttons, and knee breeches. And Ascot week, before dinner, guests gathered in the green drawing room, and ladies would mingle on one side of the room and men on the other. Members of the family would wait in the grand corridor until the King and Queen arrived. The state dining room, the dinner table had silver gilt, originally made for George IV. When the Queen led the ladies out at the end of the meal, they each dropped the King a deep curtsy. In the drawing room, the Queen had her own settee. One or two women were brought in to talk to her, while the others talked formally in small groups. The King and the men then came out in the dining room and paused for a moment with the ladies. Then they went into another room to smoke their cigars. Elizabeth's family dinners were less formal, so she did what she could to enliven the court life. Elizabeth had a way of putting people at ease more than the King and the Queen could have done. When it was possible, she would sit down at the piano after dinner, play and sing, and encourage guests to join her. And the King and Queen surprisingly enjoyed the informal ways of Elizabeth. They asked Elizabeth to call them Papa and Mama. That is what their own kids called them. And that worked out because Elizabeth always called her parents Mother and Father. The King made more concessions to the Duchess than any other members of the family would have thought possible. And usually he demanded perfection in every detail, and being late was a crime. The Duchess had a problem with being on time, and that didn't seem to matter, though. Early in the marriage, the Duke and Elizabeth were 2 minutes late for lunch and apologized for it. To the amazement of others at the table, the King said, "You're not late, my dear. I think we must have sit down 2 minutes early." And so that was a sweet thing to say. And then on another occasion, when someone mentioned her lateness all the time, the King said, "But if she weren't late, she would be perfect, and how horrible that would be." The King and Queen were happy with her because she made their son so happy. And Albert, he was nervous because of his stammer, and he was hard to get to know, but once you did, he was valued highly. Being married, he achieved a little freedom and love. He found a new home with the Duchess, and it was an enchanting adventure. She was able to calm and reassure him whenever he got upset. One of her ladies-in-waiting said that she would never forget the Duchess's gentleness with the Duke in the car when he lost at Wimbledon. The end of June, Elizabeth had to prepare a meal for her parents-in-law for the first time. The Duchess may have been concerned because the Duke wrote to his mother in advance, "I had better warn you that our cook is not very good, but she can do the plain dishes well, and I know you like that sort." The lunch went well, and Queen Mary thought that they had made the house very nice. So I'm going to stop the video here. It sounded like Elizabeth and the Duke had a very happy honeymoon, getting away from everyone and enjoying time out of the public and away from family. It showed how close they were to their families with the letters they wrote to their parents, and each was sad to leave the family that they had been living with all their lives. The only friction may have been when Queen Mary tried to take over the redoing of White Lodge, and I find that funny because Queen Mary didn't like it when she first got married to King George V, and he had decorated their home without her input. It sounds like Elizabeth didn't like what the Queen did to the bedroom, calling it hideous. All the parents seemed to like their new son or new daughter. The King and Queen were especially taken with Elizabeth, and she seemed to bring a calmness to their royal lives, and the King would forgive her in things he wouldn't have done if she had been someone else. So I'm looking forward to see what else we can find out about the royal family through the eyes of Elizabeth and other members of the royal family. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated. I wish everybody a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you.